One of my favorite new features of Illustrator CS5 is the Shape Builder tool, and with good reason. The ability to choose specific overlapping parts of shapes and combine them into new ones with a simple click and drag introduces an incredibly easy way to create complex shapes that would take 10 times longer using the old processes. In the same vein, the Shape Builder tool can also be used to trim off excess pieces of shapes, like a cookie cutter, and that's just plain fun. So let's use this wonderful new tool to create the perfect logo for our bicycle tour company, and along the way see how Pathfinder, Select Same, and the new drawing modes can help us in this process. So as well as the logo type or the emblem that we have here, we actually want to create an official logo for our company. Now this logo wants to suggest all roads meeting in the middle. If you can imagine being up in the sky and looking down at the top of a mountain, you'd have the peak or the summit in the middle, and all of these roads that come up from the valleys or wherever would all converge at this one point, and that's exactly what I want to convey with this design. Now we'll have to construct this logo from a series of overlapping objects and lines which are all centered and radially arranged, but then cut and separate them into different pieces so that we can color them, and this is going to give us a really complex shape in order to show you some of the very cool construction options inside of Illustrator. So this will be pretty fun to do. Now we need to do this in another document, and I've already got one prepared, so let's bring up our open dialog box and go down into your project files on the desktop, open the Illustrator files, and we'll open this file called Lechime Logo. Now if you go ahead and open it, you'll see it's completely blank. There's nothing in here, but I just pre-prepared it, so we've got no swatches in here and that kind of thing. Alright, now before we start drawing, because we are going to be using white as a color, having our transparency here set to white and gray is going to be a little bit hard to focus on, so I'm just going to go in and change here under the document setup, go and click on the white swatch here for our small grid, and just introduce a little bit of gray into that. Okay, so we can still see the differences in the transparency, but we will see pure white when it sits on top. It's kind of a personal preference thing there. What we're going to do is we're going to draw a series of rectangles, okay? So go ahead and select your rectangle tool, and before we draw anything, let's double check our colors. We are going to fill with white, but we do want to make sure that we select the stroke and say none, okay? Go back and select the fill afterwards. Now we're going to start drawing everything from the direct center. Now if I go ahead and turn off my transparency for a second, you can see our smart guides are so smart. They tell us exactly where the center of the artboard is, which I think is really wonderful. So turning my transparency back on, keeping my cursor where it is, we want to draw from the center with the dialog box. So if you remember the keyboard shortcuts for this, we're going to hold down the Option key or the Alt on the PC and simply click to bring up a dialog box drawing from the middle. Our first shape is going to be 2 millimeters wide by 60 millimeters deep. All right, go ahead and say OK. And then we can zoom in a little bit closer. Now, before we draw the next shape, we could come up against a potential problem here that we've seen earlier on. You remember when we had our wheel graphic and we drew all of the circles, and then we did an example where if we fill them all with a color, some of the circles disappeared because the order in which they were drawn defined their stacking order on the page, okay? And we had to do bring to front and center back. Well, this has long been a process you have to go through in Illustrator, but there's a new feature in CS5 which actually takes that function out of the equation, which is very cool. Basically, down here in the lower side of the Tools panel, we have these three small icons, and these are your drawing modes. Now, if you have a single column tool panel, you'll only see one option at a time. Now, you can press Shift-D to switch modes, or click on the icon to view the other options, or you can even click on the double arrow icon at the top of your toolbar to make it a double column, as I have here. Either way, you can find all of the options. The first one we have is normal, which is your standard. Every shape you draw is automatically on top of the previous one, and that's really very much a normal process. However, the next one, this is very cool. Draw behind. Let's go ahead and select that. Now, every shape that we draw will automatically appear behind the other one, okay? So it saves us a lot of bring to front and center back. So let's position our cursor once again in the center, Option click to bring up that dialog box, and we'll change this one to 8 millimeters wide and still at 60 millimeters deep. Go ahead and say OK. Whilst we've got it selected, let's come into the colors and just fill it with black, and there you can see it is behind the other shape. So very, very cool option to have. Now, whilst we have that mode selected, let's go ahead and create our third and final shape just by bringing up the dialog box in the center again, and making this one 14 by 60 millimeters. Click OK, and let's choose maybe a light blue for this. Now I'm just going to go back to the main selection tool so we don't create any additional shapes, and at this point, just to be consistent and safe, let's go back and choose our normal drawing mode so we're not confused in the future as to why objects don't appear in front of other ones. Again, it's one of those things you need to bounce back and forth between, but it's very cool that that's now in Illustrator. Now what we want to do is use a power transformation to copy and rotate a series of these shapes to form a fan of objects which we can then start to play around with. So with your selection tool, make sure you click and drag across all of the shapes to highlight them, and then come over to your rotate tool and double click to bring up the dialog box. Now we're going to rotate here by 45 degrees, and don't forget we're coming from the center because we did double click the tool. But we do importantly want to click copy, which will leave our original where it is. Now, as you know, a power transformation is Command D or Control D, so let's go ahead and use that keyboard shortcut twice to duplicate that rotation into 2 more locations. So we've now essentially got a nice fan array of objects. Let's go back to the main selection tool and just deselect. What we want to do is select all of the white elements. So remember our same fill color command that we used a little while ago. Select your white object, come up here to the control panel and simply click our icon to now highlight all of the white elements. Now before we do any combining here with the Pathfinder function, I want to give you some examples of how it actually works. So what I'm going to do is scroll the page over to the side here and then just option drag a copy of all of those white shapes over here onto the right hand side. Now, as you can see from the arrangement of these and these overlaps in the center, they are very much separate objects. And of course, you could deselect, grab one of them and move it. You can see they are simply separate rectangles, okay? Well, what Pathfinder does is it allows us to join them all together into one shape. But you can do that in 2 ways, live or non-destructively and permanently, okay? So the Pathfinder panel, we've had it stored up here since the very beginning. It was part of our workspace. So we're going to open that up and you can see the basic shape modes that appear here at the top. All right, so we have a unite function which will allow us to join all of the shapes together. We have minus front, which will take the topmost object and punch it through all of the other shapes, and you can even do an intersect so it leaves just where the shapes overlap. So various things that you can do here, but this standard mode of using this panel is what we call destructive. Okay, it's a permanent application. So if we go ahead and click on unite, which is ideally what we're going to use in the end, you can see that the shape has been combined. There's no more overlap in here. This is very much a permanent change. All right, let's go back one step, undo that, and instead hold down your option key, again the all-powerful option key, and go over and click exactly the same icon. All right, 2 things will happen. Visually, you'll notice that nothing has changed in here. This is now a Pathfinder shape, but it's been applied non-destructively. Secondly, you can see there is an expand button here. So basically, we're in a live mode where we can continue to adjust the shape and size and rotation of these objects before we then maybe decide, okay, I'm happy with that. I want one standard shape, a final application, if you like, of Pathfinder. Then you could go ahead and click expand. Okay. Now, just to show you that these items are being treated separately, if we get our direct selection tool, so the A key, click on one of these objects and move it around, you can see it's not affecting anything else. However, we can tell it's being treated as one shape because if we went into our color panel and chose a different color for it, you'll see that all of them change at the same time because essentially they're one object. So this is like the best of both worlds. It's very, very cool. Now, like I said, again, when you get to the end, if you're happy with what you've got, we can expand this into a finished shape. So I'm just going to go back to the main selection tool, re-highlight that whole group now and click expand. And there you can see the finished result, okay? All the overlaps have been cut out. This is now one combined shape. So I just wanted to show you the live versus permanent versions there of Pathfinder because you can do them in any way that you need to in the future. Now I'm going to delete that set of shapes. Let's come back over to our original object here. Let's go ahead and once again select the whites, come over here and say select same fill color, and then we can simply apply our shape mode to combine all of those together. Likewise, let's do the same with the black. Select one black object, select same fill color, and apply Pathfinder Unite to join all of those together. Now, if we quickly look at outline mode, you can see through here it's looking a lot less cluttered in there. If you can imagine how many shapes were overlapping a second ago, we've now created new shapes that are a lot simpler and a little bit easier to work with. Now, the next stage of this logo is to take these sort of blue arrow shapes that we can see here coming in from all sides, and you see they're still made up of the original rectangles. What we want to do is combine just this area that we can physically see into a new object, and then we can fill with red and green as we work our way around the outside. So, as you can see, that can be quite intricate because we've got long rectangles. We can join these two together, but we also need to cut out where the black goes and leave just this blue area that you can see here, okay? Well, we're going to use a powerful new tool which will allow us to do that simply by clicking and combining any of the joining overlapping shapes that we have to make brand new ones as if we'd drawn them by hand. The tool is called the Shape Builder tool. It's brand spanking new in CS5. So what we'll do first is select all of our graphics because we need to have them highlighted to tell the Shape Builder which shapes we're going to start combining with. And come over into the tools panel, and in the middle over here you'll see the shape builder tool. Okay, one item only, very simple to use. All we need to do is if you hover over an area, you'll see it becomes somewhat selected and has a small plus sign with it that tells us that we're going to add this shape to something else. All right, well, this is the cool part. If you click on one shape and drag into the next one, you'll see that it's showing up red. If we let go, it has now drawn those two into one single object. All right, whilst that's still selected, we could just then click from this one and go into this one. We've now created a new shape, completely independent of everything else. Illustrator has constructed a brand new graphic that is this shape only. Okay, now it's filling it black by default, but we can change that very easily later on. Now here's the other cool thing. If we don't have to go down and do it these two and then these two, if we can see across all three shapes, why not click and drag across all three shapes and build it immediately? This tool is such fun, it's incredible. So I'm going to work my way around this shape and do exactly the same function so we can combine only the areas that we see into brand new shapes. Remember, everything else that's underneath, that's staying exactly where it is. We're building new objects here. This is very cool indeed. So we now know that these shapes are new, and we can see as we continue to roll over them that they are so, but it'd be better if we could have them as a slightly different color. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply our actual red and green coloring to this. Let's go back to the main selection tool and just deselect for a second. Then let's get our eyedropper tool. Remember, I is your keyboard shortcut, and we'll choose flag red to start with. Okay, so remember to hold down the Option key, that's Alt on Windows, and once you've got the eyedropper color selected, the Option key is going to apply it to the object that we roll over and click on. Okay, so let's do it here with one of our arrow shapes, and you see that's now perfectly filling in. Let's skip the next one and do the one after that, because we're basically going to alternate between red and green. So every other one here, there'll be 4 in total. Perfect. Then let's go over to flag green. Once again, hold down your Option key and apply it to the other intermediate shapes. Okay, so another 4 there, and that gives us most of our artwork. Now, remember that we've done a lot of slicing here. If we go into outline mode, you can see that in the background here, the original rectangles that were overlapping, the pieces that we didn't join together with the shape builder are still here. Okay, so we need to tidy this artwork up so we're not copying and dragging around excess paths. All right, so what we'll do, let's go ahead and select our red shape here and our green. In fact, work our way all the way around the outside, because ultimately we're not going to keep the black in here. We're going to remove that so we can see through to our carbon fiber pattern when we drop it on our print document. Remember that. This is essentially going to be transparent. What we can do is also hold down the Shift key and select our white central object. So all we're doing here now is selecting the elements that we wish to keep. Everything else we want to get rid of, all right? So now go up to the Select menu and go down to Inverse, and that'll select everything underneath and our original black object. What you can do now is simply delete them, and we're left now with the final graphics of our logo. So now we present ourselves with a potential problem or a change. We're happy with the logo as it is, but maybe somewhat later in the game, we decide that the logo should actually have a circular edge to it, okay? So instead of these being completely straight here and defined by the original 45-degree angle, it would be nice if there was a constant curved edge that went through all of them. And we could have done that at the start if we'd have had a circle before we started slicing with the Shape Builder tool, all right? However, the Shape Builder tool also has a secret function, so I'm going to show you this. What we'll do is let's go across to our rectangle tool, click and hold, and select the ellipse tool, and we'll position our cursor once again right in the center. Holding down Option and Shift or Alt Shift on the PC will drag a circle out that comes to not quite the edge, okay? Leave yourself plenty of overlap, but don't come in so short that we don't end up with many of the red and green shapes visible, okay? So keep it somewhere towards the outside. All right. Now, I'll also make sure it's filled with a different color, maybe dense black, so we can see it very independently of everything else. Now, back to the Shape Builder tool. Over here in the Tools palette, we're going to select all, Command A or Control A on the PC, because again, you must select everything if you're going to use the Shape Builder tool on it. But this time, instead of using the plus, we're going to hold down the Option key or your Alt key on the PC. This will give us the minus tool, and what this essentially does is it's going to allow us to treat this circle like a cookie cutter, if you like, and trim off any of the excess shapes around the outside. This is absolutely cool. Just like we did when we were constructing the shape, simply hold down the Option key, click and drag through the shapes you don't want, and they're gone. Isn't this the coolest thing? This is one of the best tools that the Illustrator team have put into the software for a long time. This is absolutely wonderful. So I'm simply going around the outside here and trimming off all the unwanted shapes here. Remove them on the outside. absolutely perfect. All right. Do you have any idea how long that used to take in Illustrator before now? It really is crazy. Now, back to your main selection tool, going to deselect, click on our black circle to get rid of it. You see the difference? Just that little bit of tidying up and the logo looks so much more refined now. I think we've got a really nice option. Now, because it's finished, what we can do is select all and then group, Command G, Control G on the PC. And what we'll do is we'll scale it down to a finished size of maybe, I don't know, 30 millimeters square, okay, just to be consistent. So here in the control panel where we have our transform options, or over here in the transform palette, we can make sure that we constrain the options so the width and height will be the same. Let's change one of those and change it to 30 millimeters and say OK. Now that we've got this sized and grouped, let's go ahead and copy this into our other document. So Command C, Control C, put it into memory, and then use your Command tilde shortcut to take you through however many documents you have open and go back to your CMYK file. All right. Now I'm just going to close up my Pathfinder panel here and come over to the layers and make sure that we have our logos layer unlocked, because that's where obviously the logos are going to exist. Now we want to make sure that when the logos come in, we can align them on the correct artboard. So remember these processes. Let's go across to the artboards panel here and double click A3 poster so that artboard is highlighted. And then we can hit paste to bring in our logo, and that'll drop down in the center. Whilst that's highlighted, let's come up here to the control panel and make sure that align to artboard is highlighted. Remember we used align to selection a little while ago. So align to artboard here, and then we can choose horizontal center. And at this point, let's align to the bottom of the document, okay? Then we can always nudge afterwards. That's easy enough to do. Now, likewise, we want a logo over here on the A4, all right? So go ahead and double click your A4 sheet. Once again, paste the logo in. Our artboard is already selected, so we can go ahead and say center, bottom, and that'll drop it down just fine, okay? Now, whilst we have that one selected, let's go back to our original here, shift select that, and I'm just going to use the arrow key here to nudge that up a few millimeters, okay? So it kind of sits in the middle here of our mountain shape that we defined using those direct selection shortcuts earlier on, and the other one sort of follows suit. Now, we do also want one over here in our flyer, so once again, double click to select that artboard, and then we can reduce down our preview size and see what's going on, and then I'm going to paste that graphic in. Now here's an instance where we could use our draw behind functionality again, all right? I'm just going to zoom in on that center. We need this logo to sit dead center in this square, but remember, this square is locked on the backdrop color layer, and it's also one square that's inside a grid, so it's an isolation function, if you like, for us to select that. Well, we do have our snap to point functions available, our smart guides, and also our draw behind, so we may as well just draw a quick rectangle, use it to align, and then delete it, okay? So a quick little studio shortcut here, go to your rectangle tool, make sure that our draw behind mode is selected because we're on the logos layer and we want it behind the logo just so we can see what's going on, and then position yourself on the corner of that object. Your anchor point will snap. We can drag down here and snap into that corner as well. It doesn't matter what color this is, it's just the fact that we have an object there. So go back to your main selection tool, shift and click on the logo to select that as well, and then simply click on the central square to make that our key align object. All right. Now come up to the panel and say align center and also vertical align center. Then you can deselect, click on the background shape and get rid of it, and our logo now sits perfectly in the middle. Now, if we go back to viewing all pages at the same time and just collapse our layers here for a second, we can see the logos are all perfectly positioned, but at this point, 30 millimeters is too big. Now, I'm not saying that you would have them the same size on all pieces of artwork here, but for this, I think it works that they're all fairly consistent. However, 30 is too big. You now know the multiple ways to scale something using the scale tool or free transform. There are many ways to do it, but how about scaling them all at the same time by the same amount? Okay, this is a nice little option. Let's make sure that we select all three icons together. Okay, select the first one, hold down the shift key and select the other two. And then this time we're going to come up to the object menu, go down to transform and come across down to transform each. Now I briefly mentioned this earlier on. This is the ideal time to use it. What transform each does is it allows us to apply scale or move or rotation, and indeed all together, transformations to multiple selected items. Okay, so we've got three logos here. What we're telling it to do in this instance is drop down to, let's maybe do 95% on both horizontal and vertical axes. Okay, in fact, let's make this a little bit more extreme just so you can see the change being applied. 40 by 40. Okay, I've got preview turned on down here, and you can see in the background that all of these have now shrunk down to 40% of their original size based on their own anchor point, okay? Remember, if you went down to the scale tool and double-clicked and brought up the scale dialog box and said 40%, the anchor point would be somewhere here in the center because it's the center of a selected area, and there would basically be a rectangle defining all of these three. So this is a really cool way to do it. Now, an additional function to this, remember we've got used to being able to do progressive scaling, where we choose a certain percentage and then continue to nudge that value down until we get the right size. Well, Transform Each even allows us to do that. Let's make sure we change this to 90% on both axes, okay? Go ahead and click the OK button, and just as you would expect, Command D or Control D on the PC to duplicate that functionality will allow us to nudge the logo size down a further 10% every time. Isn't that just the coolest thing, all right? So get it to whatever size you need it to. I think something that ensures it's visible and isn't too small and also sits comfortably in this black shape is absolutely fine. When you're done, we can deselect, and as again, we've made a good number of changes here, so go ahead and save your document, and it's starting to really come together now.